أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد الأمين وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين واللعنة الله على أعدائهم الأجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين آمين. Dear respected viewers, thank you for joining us once more. This is your show Back to the Basics, and we are at the very least recording from Karbala because at the moment we are having some technical issues and we're no longer live in order for me to claim that. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon all my dear respected viewers, and I hope that you're all doing well, inshallah ta'ala. I pray that we have not driven you to death in boredom with some of the topics we have been discussing on this show, Back to the Basics, which of course is our show in which we promote a healthy approach to the varying differences that we will encounter with others in our day-to-day lives. Now, of course, one of the reasons I overly exert myself in explaining and contextualizing why this is necessary to be done is there seems to be a problem in the generation gap. Those who have a tendency to belong to an older generation, a generation in which it was not common for the prongs and pains of globalization to affect it, will certainly find that they might have certain issues with the concept of outwardly engaging in what we could call not even aggressive, because our approach, inshallah ta'ala, has not in any way, shape or form been aggressive, but certainly a form of actual engaging dialogue. Engaging dialogue where one highlights that yes, there are differences. Engaging dialogue in which one actually acknowledges that there are differences and they try their best to put forward justifications for why at the very least they differ with the opposite position. Now, this is very different from what we would call missionary work. I'm not promoting that we go around and act like some of the missionaries we see belonging to the more aggressive religions and sects of the world. No. I believe firmly that the Imams have stated, be for us a zina, be for us something which is beautifying. Do not be of those who are aggressive. Do not be of those who are patronizing. Do not be of those who are arrogant. And of course, this is part and parcel of being a believer, because we believe that it is not but the grace of God that has guided us. And inshallah ta'ala, we hope that Allah Azza wa Jal gives us that grace so that we may remain firm upon truth, or indeed, if we are not upon truth, that we may be guided to the truth. And of course, one of the things which one should not have in this regards is an arrogance where we in a self-conceited manner believe that we can perceive, judge, and condemn others on a meter that we have created intellectually based upon their sincerity levels. Of course, dear viewers, the reason I state all of this is that we have been discussing numerous facets of our differences with other worldviews. Particularly, we have pretty much finished our differences with those who believe in atheism. And now, alhamdulillah, the management in London have provided me with some of the feedback, some of the inquiries. I'm not sure if this is an accurate sample. I believe in some cases it is, as we shall see. But I wished to occupy my time, inshallah ta'ala, by engaging some of you out there who have chosen to engage with me. And I pray, inshallah ta'ala, that you'll find what I have to say certainly, at the very least, quenches the very interest you have shown in writing to the management of the channel. Now, of course, I will concede that it's somewhat miraculous that I even get these letters, because the channel has not actually set out an email address through which I myself can be contacted, but that is even maybe something we will consider, although I have tried my best as far as these shows are concerned to not allow them to become something in which I'm engaging with others. Not engaging with others in the sense that I don't want anyone else to dictate the agenda of the show. And the reason for that is I feel that the methodology that is being laid out, the approach which I am utilizing, is the right approach that I would want, say for example, children to watch, that I would want anyone who is a young and mature adult to be able to see. And I believe it is befitting of the standards that I would be happy to see on any other channel as well. So inshallah ta'ala, I'm going to continue the approach I'm taking, but I will take time out for these next few episodes just to address some of these letters. And they have come from very, very diverse backgrounds, dare I say. So allow me to quote, let me start at least inshallah ta'ala with the more friendly letters, and definitely after those letters we can move on to some of the more aggressive ones, which I was advised maybe not to cover, but I do think that it's necessary that it's seen that I am addressing the concerns of everyone, inshallah ta'ala. So this is the first letter. Now, just to advise, in most cases, with the exception of the quite angry one, the contact details have been removed from the individual pieces of paper. This was done by myself, actually, when I was printing out the forwarded emails to myself. However, just because I'm not certain of your name doesn't mean that I don't have you in mind. I'm sorry, it's not an act of disrespect. It's just in my printing of the letters, I've been slightly disorganized, actually. So I'll read the first one. Dear Mr. Yahya Seymour, I am an atheist from New Jersey. It is a hobby of mine to debate with theists and believers in God, and I find the Muslim speakers and preachers to be the most arrogant and cliche, sides alongside the Christians whom, dare I say, most Muslims seemingly follow suit in taking arguments from. Okay. I have noticed some overlap even between your own show and the arguments put forward by Christian apologists in certain areas. I do give you credit due to your academic mannerisms, which at times even come across as slightly too polite. Well, I am Scottish, and so there is a need for me to go out of my way to be more polite than say I might normally be. But that's just in order not to frighten the children out there and to frighten anyone that's watching the show. I'm happy that you found my mannerisms to be pretty decent, but inshallah ta'ala, it doesn't mean that necessarily I have the best of akhlaq, and I seek refuge from the word I. Nonetheless, I have found some of your presentation flawed and would like to address this in the following questions and points of clarification. And thereafter he goes on to list some of the points of clarification, and we shall be going through those one by one, inshallah ta'ala. Well, firstly, allow me to say this. My atheist viewer from this, I'm not sure, is New Jersey a city or a state? I know at the very least it's a state, as far as I'm aware. I have actually been there, just for the record. And of course, there are many TV shows which were broadcasting during my youth, prior to my conversion to Islam, which are based in New Jersey. So I have a brief familiarity with it. So I'm happy to see that the viewers of this channel extend to more than just the regular Muslim Shia viewers, firstly. And I do thank you very much for sending your letter in. The second thing you stated is that it is a hobby of yours to debate with theists and believers in God. Well, I'm not going to lie, I can understand that. I used to enjoy debates. I used to spend time going on to all these programs which have probably changed over the past decade, and whilst I would have at one point been one of the youthful generation, I'm no longer part of that generation. So back in my days it was Pal Talk, and there was another program called Stick Cam, which I don't even believe exists anymore. And so I am familiar with these debating venues. and I am familiar with what it's like to have debating as a hobby. Although I would probably say that, I've said it in previous episodes of this show as well, at least in one, we have a narration from our imams, and our scholars of akhlaq have traditionally stated, by akhlaq, by the way, I'm so sorry, if you are going to ever see this episode, inshallah ta'ala, then I'm addressing your letter and you're a non-Muslim, so you won't be familiar with the terms I'm using at times. Akhlaq is a word for ethical disposition. So in our science of ethics and moral behavior, we have those who, when teaching us how to have the better behavior out of people, they would say to us that debate can often what we call harden the hearts and remove people from the remembrance of God. Now, by the way, I'm sure you'll be familiar with this if you have seen my shows on atheism. That's not for me to say that an atheist cannot act moral. So when I say that we remove remembrance of God from the hearts, I'm not saying that a person would by default be immoral as a result of that. No. What I'm stating is that there is this tyrannical nature within us, and we do have a narration that states that inside every human being there is a degree of Fir'aun. Fir'aun is a reference to the Pharaoh, and particularly the Pharaoh at the time of Musa, or Moses. And he is famous in our holy book as stating that he is the Lord the Most High. So what this narration is referring to is that arrogance, that ability to come out with a statement along those lines. So I personally can understand your interest in debates, but at the same time, I don't necessarily recommend it. And I would say that if you are interested in these debates, sir, if you don't believe that there's a God, you're wasting your time for the rest of your life by taking an interest in debates. Go have fun, because at the end of the day, you believe that this is all it is. But if you are genuinely looking for truth, and I pray that you are, then I would hope that you have taken a look at some of the arguments I presented against the problem of atheism. And I very much pray that when I reach what I would call the monotheism, the tawheed of Ahlul Bayt, of Al Muhammad, the group who I follow and take my Islamic teachings from, then I hope that you would stay tuned and maybe see what you think of that tawheed, inshallah ta'ala. I think it's going to be fairly unique and something you've probably never heard from any other group. But definitely, I hope that you stay sincere and keep watching and monitoring these debates, but with the intention of submitting to truth when you find it, inshallah ta'ala. I find the Muslim speakers and preachers to be the most arrogant, and I'm assuming this word is cliche, but it says cliche as far as I found it, alongside the Christians whom, dare I say, most Muslims seemingly follow suit in taking arguments from. Well, as I've stated, we do believe that debates would naturally harden the hearts. And so it's not my surprise that you find anyone who debates quite arrogant. Generally, my experience is that if it's a person's first debate, they can get really nervous and retain calm. But a person that regularly debates, you'll find that they're more concerned with what we would call rhetorical power, putting on a show. You'll find that they're rarely even addressing their opponent. They're more addressing an audience. And so I'm not surprised that you found everyone who does debates arrogant. I'm surprised if you would find that just Muslims are arrogant, but unfortunately, as we say, Muslims don't represent Islam. I don't represent Islam. Sir, I believe your name was Daniel, but I might have mistaken it. I apologize. I do come across many names on a daily basis. Whatever your name is, very disorganized of me not to print it out. I'm going to go to a short break, and afterwards we're going to continue addressing your letter. Thank you so much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear viewers, thank you for joining me during that very short break. And we, of course, are addressing the letter from this very... I have no idea about your age, sir, so I can't make the claim that you're young. But you're certainly, at least from the letter I'm reading, very respectful. I'm reading a letter from a very respectful atheist who's writing to me from New Jersey, all the way in the United States. And he had quite a few things to say to me. I'm going through the first bulk of his message, then I'll go through his points individually, inshallah ta'ala. And I do certainly want to reiterate that I thank you for writing in. And certainly I appreciate the fact that you have come up with some counterpoints to the arguments I have made. And inshallah ta'ala, I'll be addressing those if Allah gives me the opportunity in today's show. You did say that you found Muslim speakers to be quite arrogant. I believe I've addressed that. And you found that some of them take from Christians in their argumentation, and you stated, I have noticed some overlap between your own show and arguments put forward by Christian apologists in certain areas. What I would state here is there's a reason why natural theology is never entitled Christian natural theology or Muslim natural theology or Jewish natural theology or Buddhist natural theology. The intellect is a tool which is, of course, quite consistent with any framework. The ability to reason is something that every human being has been given. Now, of course, whether or not they can account for that reasoning, as you know my argument is with the atheist, is a different question. But it's not surprising, therefore, in the domain of rational theology, arguments that don't require any texts, that you would find some overlap. Because we are stating that these are arguments that the mind would naturally reach. Of course, depending upon the worldview, you might find a different assumption underpinning the argument. So you might find that a Christian undermines his intellect at a certain point, or would argue, when it comes to the facts of science, that we live in a fallen universe, and therefore we no longer trust science in this particular area. But generally speaking, we all believe in the ability to utilize the intellect, whether or not we can account for it, and if you can't account for it, I believe you exclude yourself from the conversation, as you know. But nonetheless, my point is that when it comes to natural theology or general rational points, we all share a common source. Now, you state that my mannerisms are good and that you find me to be too polite. I've already explained myself away on that, but we seek refuge with Allah from the word I. You have found my presentation flawed and would like to address this in the following questions and points of clarification. Number one, I'll quote what you say and I'll respond to it later. Have you considered that evolution may provide a perfectly rational justification for why the human mind is able to discern truth as opposed to be a stumbling block to trusting the mind, as you suggest? So your question is essentially this. If one of the purposes, if we can call it that, or the main intended aim of our functions as evolution has given them to us, is for the purpose of survival, then surely knowing the truth is a good way of surviving, therefore we would survive. Well, I can understand your argument. It's just problematic on several grounds. Number one, if everything is just matter in motion, if everything is just blindly guided in this chaotic process in which life generates from non-life, and things just happen randomly, one species will over time become another for the purpose of survival, and this is completely unguided. I don't see here why we would say that there's even such a thing as truth in order for us to say we can trust that rational ability to discern truth. Number two, most people that have looked into evolutionary psychology, they have stated that evolution is concerned with the 4 F's: fighting, fleeing, food, reproduction. You have to consider whether or not truth is a determining factor in being able to acquire any of the 4 F's. And I think the best way of doing that is to compare ourselves to our cousins, who are of course the chimpanzees, according to what evolution states. Compare ourselves to our more distant cousins, which is of course the rest of the animal kingdom, and see, do any of them seem concerned with truth? More importantly, I do think this is where the rather decent argument of C.S. Lewis would apply, which was that if something was never designed to function in a certain way, namely the mind was never meant to reveal truths to us, then why should we trust it to reveal truth? And this would kind of fall under the question if I design a product which is meant to be a radio receiver, but it happens to receive phones like a mobile phone, happens to receive phone calls like a mobile phone does, should I continue to use that device expecting it to work just like a mobile phone? Or should I think to myself, well, maybe I need to go back to the drawing board and not use this either for receiving calls and nor as a radio receiver? Because if something was not meant for the purpose you're using it for, the chances are it's not going to last for that purpose. Number 2, why are most great scientists today atheists if you believe that upon atheism we cannot trust our minds? That's a very good question. I do think I actually responded to it during the series, but the fact that you're asking it, sir, shows that my ability to articulate that fact was probably lacking. The answer to that would be that whilst I believe that atheism provides zero way of accounting for rationality and accounting for our ability to use our minds, I acknowledge that we live in a world where we do use rationality and can trust our minds. And therefore, I would say that we live in a real world, and as a result of atheism being unable to account for it, we don't live in the atheist world. So I believe that basically you and I, we live in the real world, which is God's world. A world where morality does exist, where truth exists, where the ability to trust our mind exists, where a decent explanation for existence exists, where revelation has come, where laws have come. And I don't believe that that's the same world that atheism can account for. And so what I would say here is my argument about the ability to trust the mind is rather similar about the ability to be moral. I believe that morality exists. I believe that atheists can be moral. I believe that atheists can be more moral than religious people. I believe that atheists can be more intelligent and use their mind and discern truth to a certain degree more than religious people can in certain areas such as the natural sciences. My argument is one group can account for it and the other can't. So upon atheism, you can't account for the ability to discern truth. And upon atheism, you can't account for the existence of morality. And perhaps if you haven't seen all these shows, and for all I know, you may even have stopped watching at such a point where you'll never see this show. But I do hope that you do reach that point, inshallah ta'ala. You have yourself admitted several times that atheists have better morality. Doesn't that defeat your point? So again, the answer would be the same as the previous. I'm saying that an atheist can be a much more moral person, and I'm sure there are many more atheists out in the world today who are much more moral than I, Yahya Seymour, am. What I'm stating is that their behavior is arbitrary because they have no good reason, number one, to be moral, as Dr. Alex Rosenberg states. It just makes them feel better. So if that's your only purpose, then you being good is just as valid as someone believing that may Allah preserve you, all women are inferior, or all disabled people are inferior and deserve to be wiped out. Now, of course, we would condemn the latter as completely disgusting and completely unacceptable. But upon atheism, if you are incapable of explaining away objective morality and where that objective morality is grounded, then you would be incapable of explaining away this phenomenon. You stated thereafter, I did not hear you provide any positive proof or truth for, in fact, sorry, I'll reread it. I did not hear you provide any positive truth for God's existence. And I believe here you meant proof, but perhaps this is just a term I'm not familiar with. And on the live shows, you are not discussing Christianity, Buddhism, or Judaism. Can I take that as a concession that you possess no positive proof for your assertion? Okay, well, this one is slightly more complicated because I don't understand were the questions heading, and we have run out of time in addition to that. So my friend from New Jersey, my atheist friend from New Jersey who has written me this letter, I am going to have to apologize to you as we're rounding up on this show, and inshallah ta'ala, that is to say God willing, I will address what you have said in this letter to the best of my ability, if I can understand it, in the next episodes. Dear viewers, thank you so much for joining me on this your show, Back to the Basics. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.